One of the reasons for the resurgence of JavaScript in recent years is the enormous popularity of what's come to be known as Ajax. Now, Ajax sounds like a separate technology or a language. It isn't. It's just a useful buzzword to describe a cool technique we can do with JavaScript. While it officially stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML, well, it's really more to do with Ajax being a good acronym than anything else, because it doesn't even require XML. As far as we're concerned, Ajax is JavaScript. It's just a very specific use of it. And what it means is that after a web page has opened in the user's browser, we can have JavaScript behind the scenes communicate back to the server, even pass and retrieve data, and update parts of the page without the entire page itself needing to reload. A simple example. If you've used, for example, Google and started typing and found it able to start to fill out the information that it thinks you're looking for and actually update the page as you're typing, this is Ajax going on. As I'm typing, JavaScript is passing these characters to the web server, which is then returning the most likely results as I type and updating the page without me actually refreshing the page at all. If you use an online map, the ability to scroll into places or to zoom in, and as I zoom in start seeing more and more explicit data, is the same idea, that this is being fetched from the server as I'm using the zoom button. Now, in a lot of cases, this is almost transparent if I'm working with it slowly, but if I start to drag quite quickly, you'll often see it hurrying up to try and fill in that data for me. Either way, it's certainly usable. So this technique, this Ajax ability, lets you make more responsive sites that can behave like real applications. And for things like search, autocomplete, and maps, being able to load data on the fly actually makes these sites possible. There's no way we could load all the data up front. And Ajax builds on all these skills we've been working with so far, understanding basic JavaScript, grabbing and manipulating DOM elements. And there's two new things we need to be able to do. One is, from JavaScript, create an object that will call the server. We're creating a request here. And two, done as a very separate part, is let the server pass information to us to deal with any response. Now, these are done as two distinct steps rather than, say, one function call, because we don't know how long it's going to be between the request and getting the response, and we don't want to hang the page while we wait. This is the asynchronous part of Ajax. So how do we do this? Well, to do it, we work with a new object, the XML HTTP request object. This is the middleman between our page loaded in the browser and the server side and any communication we want to do. But unfortunately, it's actually one of those objects with a cross-browser difference, so I can't just write a line of code like this that creates it. I first have to see if it exists. So what I do is something more like this. I'll just define the variable, and then I'm going to do a feature check. Ask if certain objects exist on this browser. In this case, what I'm asking is if window.xml HTTP request. That doesn't do anything except ask, is there an object of this name? If there is, I know I'm on Firefox or Safari or a browser like that, and I can then go ahead and create a new XML HTTP request. If that returns false, I'll then go on and check, well, do you have window.activex object? If that's true, then I'm running on Internet Explorer, and I'll create it as the Microsoft.xml HTTP object done this way. And this is one of those areas where I can't really blame Microsoft for being a little different, because they actually did invent this object in the first place. So they're not just trying to do a different version of it. They just had their own specific reasons for creating it. Now, what I have to do after this is I haven't yet said, what am I calling? Where on the server am I reaching to? Have I executed this request or not? So I do need to go ahead and configure and send it, but not yet, because I first have to tell it what to do when a response comes in. That's the second part of this. Now, that request object, when we execute it, will start to kick off events, the same way as a lot of things kick off events. The one we're really interested in will be the onReady state change event. And the same way as dealing with, say, a user click event or a window load event, we say, okay, when this event is occurring on that request object, I'm going to call, in this case, an anonymous function, which right now will just output a message to console.log. However, as we'll see, this event is actually quite chatty, and the request will cause this event to be called multiple times before we're completely finished with the entire communication request. So I'll get into that in just a moment. But after I've been prepared to accept this response, after I've created this event handler, then I can configure and send it. I tell it where the request is going. In this case, I say I'm using a get rather than a post. I'm going to call the address, in this case, mysite.com/somedata.php. The last argument here of true means, yes, this is asynchronous. So as soon as we do it, we're going to go ahead and execute any other JavaScript code. And we're just going to allow the browser itself to handle any response. We're not going to wait for it. And then we send it. I'm passing null here, but if I had some parameters to send, I could do that too. So let's see a simple example in code. I have about as straightforward an HTML page as I can have here. I've got one div called main content with this is an Ajax example. And in my script file that I'm linking to, I have some simple boilerplate code for creating this Ajax request. So on line 4, I define a variable called myRequest. On line 7, I'm going to ask if the XML HTTP request object exists. If so, we're in Firefox or Safari. I'll go ahead and create it. If not, we're probably in IE, so I'll go ahead and create it the different way. Either way, by the time I get to line 14, I should have an object. I'm going to create an event handler for our request, which in this case, we'll just call console.log and say we were called. Line 19, now I have to configure that request. Where's it going? In this case, I'm going to say do a get. And I've just given it the address of simple.txt, which is effectively going to treat it as a relative link here. I wanted to do it simply so that I didn't have to work with creating up server-side scripts, all that kind of thing. I do have a file that's existing at the same location as my HTML page and my JavaScript file. It's just called simple.txt, and it says, this is the contents of a simple text file. So that's what we're after, and then we're going to send the request. Now, after I execute this code, if I did have more JavaScript code, it would just go on and execute any subsequent JavaScript. We're not waiting for the request to come back. That's why we set up the event handler. Because whether that request takes 10 milliseconds or 10 seconds, we don't want to block, meaning we don't want to hang the page. So we'll just go ahead, and when it calls us back, it'll jump back here into this anonymous function. So let's see if this works. I'm going to jump over and just execute this code. Open it up in Firefox. Now I do have my console open here, and I can actually say that I got that console.log message of we were called 5 times, which is a little strange. Well, no, it's not really. The thing is that this onReadyState change event actually gets called multiple times. And every time it's called, it's at a different stage of the request and response. And it passes in a little piece of information. I'm going to write that out so you see what it looks like. I'm going to say console.log. I have a property of the request object called readyState. So if I save this, go back over and refresh it again, I can see that I get called several times with a different state, 1, 2, 3, and 4. In fact, 4 is the one that I'm interested in. That when there's a ready state of 4, I then know that I've gotten a response back from the server, from whatever I was asking for. So what I'm going to do is just put in a little bit of code here. It got me starting off with an if statement. If my request.readyState is equal to 4, meaning I know I've got a response back, then I'm just going to call a few DOM methods here. First, I'm going to create a new paragraph element and call it P. Then I'm going to create a new text node. Now, here's the only important bit about this. We've seen everything except this. Once that response has been received, I will have a property of the request object called response text. And that's going to be whatever I got back from that call. So we create the element. We create a text node with that content in it. I then add the text node to the paragraph. I then add the paragraph to the DOM tree, to the main content div. So save this file, jump back over into the browser, and what I'm hoping for is when I refresh this, I'll see the page itself updating that content. There we go. This is the contents of a simple text file. Now, obviously, because all my files are running locally, what I'm not seeing is perhaps the slight delay that I might have in updating this page, but this is still proving the point. Yes, it's a simple example here, but the entire process of doing this in a production site is the same. We're creating a request, we're setting up a handler to wait for any response, and then we're firing the request off. Now, as with other areas where there are cross-browser differences, when I'm doing anything substantial with Ajax, I am a fan of using a library like jQuery, which provides helper functions so you don't have to worry about writing the cross-browser check, because it can get a little more complex with older browsers, for example. So take a look at that if that's an area that you're interested in.